I'm speaking as a banker because I'm now Santander's Global Defense Advisor, and Santander has the aspiration, the intention to become Europe's largest defense bank, and the capital is necessary. It's a pleasure to be back in this region. I spent much of my early service serving in the Balkans, and for those of us who lived through that experience, it's impossible to forget the horror and the suffering that people in this part of the world went through. And yet we have forgotten. It's the point that Dimitri was making. We've forgotten that in human history, peace is a brief interlude between wars. We've forgotten that wars are long. By historical standards, the First World War, the Second World War, and this Ukrainian war are short wars. It is not enough to have defense capability for the first 3 weeks, or to indulge in a fallacy that wars are short. They're not, they're long. We've forgotten that wars are frequent. In the millennia between 900 and 1900, Russia only has 25 years of uninterrupted peace, and if you're English, 56 out of every 100 years, you're at war. We've forgotten that wars spread, that they metastasize. We've forgotten that wars are unbelievably destructive. 1.3 million casualties the Russians have taken. That's more than the US did in the Second World War. And we've forgotten that wars are costly. So in the UK, in 1937, we're spending 2.9% of GDP on defense. By 1940, it's 10%. By 1945, it's 50%. We should not be worrying about investing in deterrence to prevent wars, because it's a lot cheaper than waging a war. So let's recognize the threat for what it is. Yes, there is a hybrid threat, everything, everywhere, all at once, but predominantly we're facing an imperial, expansionist, aggressive power in Europe, and Putin's aims are not just to subjugate Ukraine and reduce it to a vassal state, but his aims are also to extend the borders and the influence of Russia, to restore Catherine the Great's Russia, and his intentions are to dismantle the European security architecture. And so, after Ukraine, these will be his next points of focus. And if we are not in a position to deter by denial and not through punishment, and that means having relevant capabilities ready and at the point of need, then we will suffer a fate where NATO falls apart, and the world will be much more like Yalta than it will be like Helsinki. So what is to be done to channel Lenin? Well, first of all, Europe has to recognize that being a one-dimensional superpower no longer stacks up in a world where hard power is what counts. It's no use being a regulatory superpower or a financial superpower if you don't have hard power and tech power. Secondly, we have to recognize that Ukraine is the fulcrum between a Yalta world and a Helsinki world. And so we have no choice but to enable Russian defeat. And it is possible. It is absolutely possible to deny Putin his objectives, because that's what defeat means. Because if we don't, the consequences are appalling. And we do that by imposing cost and by supporting Ukraine in a way you heard from Dmitry Kuleba earlier on. And the acid test of our will are the frozen assets that are being debated coming up next year. And then thirdly, from a European perspective, we have to rearm. And to do that, we need to get after deregulation. Not simplification, because simplification assumes that the regulations are necessary in the first place. We have to deregulate so that we move from a market which is fragmented to one that is consolidated. We promote integration, we create scale, we mobilize capital, and critically, we secure our supply chains. Because China has an absolute veto on European rearmament, since it controls 90% of the rare earth minerals that will be at the frontier technologies that we need to rearm. And that is going to be a 10-year project to overcome. Secondly, we have to invest in relevant sovereign capabilities. But more important than that, we need a procurement system that operates and matches the pace of innovation and adaptation, and not one that is fitted for 10-year, 15-year, 20-year programs. And finally, we need to consider the nuclear question, because extended deterrence is not going away, or is no longer something we can take for granted. So if I bring this to a close, I'm a great fan of history. Ibn Khaldun reminds us that prosperous nations there's 4 signs of decline in a prosperous nation is when you have excessive bureaucracy, you have excessive taxation, you spend beyond your means, and you use your military edge. Europe is falling into that trap, but we have agency and we can turn it around.